Shit.
Coming ready or not? Horror show afternoon, my droogie, how are veshes?
What are you talking about?
I'm gather eating a nadsat. It's bazoomy.
If you say so.
You can scaz at that again.
If you say so.
That's not horror show.
So what are we doing today?
Well, we're gonna pony our Azkaz called A Clockwork Orange. Oh, Jesus!
What?
Oh, I've sat on my nads, I've redded me arbles.
Baby!
Oh, do you fancy a chai?
How about we just do the video?
Chidesni China! You're full of chapuka. You're having a guff. I'm faggy, I can't be fashed.
You're off your Gulliver?
Yeah, I was pretty hound and horny. Do you want to do the old in and out?
I think I know that one.
Alright, let's leave the camera rolling.
This is a public service announcement that this video is going to contain some seriously adult themes because we are going to be looking at A Clockwork Orange. So if for any reason you may feel triggered by subjects that involve assault, sexual assault, or maybe even forms of aversion therapy, it might be worth not watching this particular video. Thank you for your time. Now, back to the content! Not bad.
You did warn them. If you're still here after this point, well, you should go all Ludovico on your ass. I just got sexually assaulted then. So
Hashtag me too.
Yeah.
Right.
Why am I dressed like this anyway? Is this supposed to be somebody from the...
Because someone on the internet said that you look like Alex. So I've done my best attempt. If you show the camera. Does he look like Alex? Does he? Does he? The story comes in 3 major chunks. There is Alex does crimes, Alex spends time in prison, and Alex goes back out into society reconditioned. And we're going to work through them chunk at a time because I do not know where the book varies. So it'll give you ample opportunity to go, oh yeah, this was different because.
Yeah, so let's jump on into part 1, Alex does crime.
Alex is the leader of a gang of droogs. And they are 20-ish, which I believe is different in the books.
Oh, I don't know if it's actually specifically mentioned, but I always assumed they were supposed to be teenagers. Okay. In fact, well, yeah, they're definitely teenagers because Nadsat, which is the language they speak, the Droogs speak, Nadsat means teenager, which is kind of the point. It kind of reflects today, like all today's kids are off yeeting and YOLOing and nobody knows what they're doing. They're all speaking Nadsat, you know? Okay,
so what exactly is Nadsat?
Nadsat is the form of English that Alex and his Droogs use. And again, it means teenager. It comes from a mixture of Russian, bits of Cockney rhyming slang and stuff in there. A lot of people have said that's what's kind of put them off, I guess, both the book and the movie, although I think the book more because it's narrated by Alex.
You are forced to really pay attention to everything Alex is saying because you have to try and translate it as you go. And the way it's performed in the film is, in many cases, your best clue. When Alex is going around committing crimes, he hears high on a kind of spiked milk from the milk bar. Is that in the book?
Yes, that's in the book.
The first things he does is he gets in combat with another gang who's about to gang rape a lady, and it kind of sets you up to think of him as a hero because he is the narrator. You're supposed to relate to the protagonist and like him because also Alex is a pretty good looking guy, so you kind of want to relate to him and you're like, oh yeah, he saved a woman. But then they go out and do something that they called ultra violence and a surprise home visit in which they attack the husband and rape the wife, and it really subverts your expectations because it's portrayed as really just anarchistic and joyfully done, which is really nasty. And in the scene, the actor performing Alex improvised the song Singing in the Rain, which really adds to that playful I don't care aspect to the way they were doing it. And apparently
yeah, that's not part of the book.
At the end of the first night, they go back to the milk bar and you see the first sign of Alex showing some kind of heightened culture that elevates him above his fellow droogs. There's an opera singer who starts to randomly start singing a section of Beethoven, and he just adores it to the point where he assaults his fellow droog for showing no interest in it. And it's a major part of his character that he really loves Beethoven. One of the key giveaways that Alex is so young is because he has this counsellor who comes and visits him, and they talk about if you go and do this again, it's not going to be the correctional education facility, you're going to be off to prison this time. One of the things that makes you relate to Alex a little bit more is the fact that he is clearly at the mercy of this counsellor who is kind of gay and paedophilic, and it's shown really quite aggressively, and you want to sympathise with him. It's one of the first key things where you think, he's kind of a result of his circumstances as well. Another iconic scene of the film is where Alex goes to a record store and picks up two lovely lasses who were majorly influential in me figuring out how I was meant to look for this. He takes them home and has a day-long threesome with them, and Stanley Kubrick did something that was very popular in porn movies at the time, was he filmed all of it, but he sped it up so quickly that it got past the censors. And another thing about the film which was really interesting was the framing, the shape of the footage was designed to be watched on a TV screen at home. So it was almost like he knew in advance that it was going to get banned from the cinemas, so he didn't bother about cinematic release. He knew that people were going to be watching it on their TVs at home as a dirty secret.
One thing I like about that scene as well, in the record store, they're talking about some of the different bands, and there's a fictitious band called the Heaven 17, and that's where the actual real band Heaven 17 gets their name from.
Oh cool, so it's like a tribute.
Yeah, they picked it up and they were like, oh, this fictitious band from Clockwork Orange, that'll do.
Other things that Alex does in this really chaotic section of the book where he's just committing all these crimes and you're getting to know just how vile he is. He also murders a woman who is this like yoga cat lady, and the way that she is murdered is very telling of Stanley Kubrick's filming style, because it's really quite graphic in a way that you're not expecting. Because what he does is, you'll see it right here, is when he hits the woman in the face with the giant cock sculpture, the moment of impact is shown with this, and it is such an affront to the senses. You're not expecting it. It kind of hits you in the face as well, so you almost feel the impact that this woman goes through, and it's a really effective way of making you think you've seen it when you haven't. I mean, Hitchcock does a similar thing in Psycho. Because
up to this point, he's been trying to establish his control over his droogs. And so we have the iconic bit where they're in the water and Dim reaches out for his help and Alex grabs his hand and goes, and then so because of this, his droogs are keeping watch while he's inside this mad cat yoga woman's house. And he's like, oh, you know, I've just beat this woman to death. We should probably get out of here. He doesn't know as well that the police are already on their way. And as he goes to escape, his droogs, what do? They blind him somehow, don't they? Yeah, they hit him with a bottle, isn't it?
Bottle of milk.
Yeah, that's it. And then it blinds him, he can't see, so the cops pick him up. And then he ends up going off to jail. That doesn't happen till like halfway through the book. I think the pacing maybe of the book and the movie might be a little different.
That's weird, because it really, I've watched the film and I've checked the time signatures. It is 3 acts. Yeah. And Act 1, the first third, is Alex doing the crimes. You're saying it's like a half of the book or more?
I would say so, yeah, about probably just under half.
Yeah, and in this next section we see Alex beaten by the police, but also there's this obsession with following the rules. There is such a rigid control where it's don't cross the line. And you'll see here an early example of social distancing where I swear they're 2 meters apart in these scenes. And he starts to, you know, suck up to the authorities. He's very good at being a good boy when it suits him, and he starts cozying up to the priest. And there are a couple of scenes where you're like, if Alex let him, I'm not sure this priest might, you know. He shows his interest in this new kind of technique that's designed to rehabilitate. What's that technique called?
The Ludovico Technique.
The way this technique works, it's very similar to aversion therapy that was made infamous during the 50s and 60s, and this was used on homosexuals back when it was still illegal. You know, people actually did live this, even though it looks like the most horrific section of the film. Admittedly, I hope it's stylized beyond recognition, but the concept is the same. You are made to feel sick while watching footage of something that used to give you pleasure, and that is the thing you are being trained to not want to do anymore. Something that provides a stark contrast to the chaotic sadism of Alex's behaviour is the very controlled sadism of the authorities. You have the scientists who just keep on going no matter how distressed Alex becomes, especially once he realises that as a side note to everything else that's happening in the conditioning, Beethoven's music is playing in the background, which means he's going to also get conditioned against that as well. And that he did not sign up for.
It was actually, again, very different in the book, because in the movie, it was specifically just Beethoven's Ninth that he was conditioned against, whereas in the book, it was just any classical music.
Oh, fascinating.
And that would presumably make life a lot more difficult, because classical music's everywhere as well.
Yeah, even when you don't realise it. I mean, it could be playing in the background right now, and only just now are you noticing it.
Yeah, who knows? Is that it very much asks you about the importance of free will, and we'll get onto this later as well when we talk about the difference between the way the book ended and the way the movie ended, because it asks you the question of, if you're doing good things because you have to, is that actually goodness? In the same way as, if the only reason that you're not going around killing people and coveting thy neighbour's oxen and shit, the only reason is because you're scared of vengeance from God, that makes you a worse person than someone like me who doesn't go around doing that shit because I think it's morally wrong, you know? So I think, again, it does ask these, and that kind of comes back to the religion aspect of it as well, I suppose.
Because it is a priest that brings up that point. The fact that Alex is trying to convince the priest that he just wants to be good. He is so contrite. I mean, it shows in his body language and the way he talks. He's choosing it, but he doesn't realise what he's choosing. And he's choosing to lose his ability to choose well.
And he's very quick to do it as well. He's like, yep, sign me up, I don't care, just get me out.
Once Alex is successfully conditioned, he is shown off on a stage to all of the people we assume are funding this thing. And what happens is, imagine this is Alex, actually Alex, he's on stage and he's conditioned, and someone just goes, what are you gonna do? What are you gonna do? Huh?
I'm sorry, sir.
Okay, start getting sick. Come on, you can do this, come on. Basically.
And then imagine that she's a sexy naked woman.
Yeah.
Stop imagining her naked. Then he's like, my hat fell off again.
Alex is forced to lick the boot
of
the antagonist. And
you're wearing slippers anyway.
Yeah, and I wouldn't do that. I mean, this carpet. There's a moment there where I quite enjoy that shot because, well, it's Schadenfreude. If you're familiar with the phrase, it's when you dislike someone so you enjoy their misery. And this is the beginning of the comeuppance section of the story, because he has been so vile throughout this film that now that he's starting to get a little bit of karma, you're like, yeah, Alex, take it, take it. And by the end of this scene though, you start to think, oh, it would be nice if he could at least fight back and then lose. But he can't even fight back in this. So it's the beginning of the journey that section 3 takes us on.
See, I don't really have that Schadenfreude, I don't think. But that's because mostly throughout this entire section, my attention is much more railing against the system and being like, this is just bonkers. Like, how have people not reformed this prison system? It makes no sense. And then at the end, I'm just like, well, this is just further evidence that the prison system is terrible.
Alex is now released back into society. So he's in the world where people know him as that violent Alex, but he is not that violent Alex anymore. And one of the first things he does is that he goes home to find that his parents have started to rent out his room to strangers like this gentleman.
So what happens, he's walking around, he's feeling very sad for himself, and he's starting to get used to this new way of thinking, or at least in the book he is, because he's forced to think in a certain way, because if he doesn't think in that way, then he's obviously physically sick. And he's walking along, and he sees this tramp, and he gives the tramp some money, and he says, you know, good evening to you, sir, here you go, have some money, because again, he's trying to be a good person, he has no choice or whatever. And then the homeless man recognises him and he goes, oi, you're the one who beat me up, blah blah blah. And then the homeless man turns on him and starts kicking 7 shades of shit out of Alex, and Alex is just there like, oh God, oh, you know, and this is what I think is worse, he's like, it's actually like, as soon as somebody, you know, as soon as somebody commits a crime on him, he can't defend himself. Like, at least when he was committing crimes on other people, they didn't just like immediately start feeling sick and have no way of defending themselves, you know. So in some ways he's actually more defenseless than his victims, because as well as being attacked, the attack makes him sick. And then we get the police show up.
One of his droogs is now a police officer.
Captain Dim, Constable Dim or whatever. Except don't call him Dim. He doesn't, don't call me that no more.
No. And also, you might notice this, that the gang leader from the original fight scene, he's the other policeman. So they've put their differences aside because they've now been hired by the ultimate gang, which is the Metropolitan Police.
We police now. Yeah. They've grown up. Like, Alex has been away off in jail or whatever, and these guys have actually grown up, got past their teen years or whatever, and put that behind them. And then that's why they've now become policemen, because they're proper members of society rather than just rowdy droogs, you know?
And as proper members of society, they take Alex out into the woods and promptly torture him with water and beatings.
That's what you get. So Alex then is sort of stumbling around, and he sees a house he recognises, and he's kind of like, for a little bit, he's like, why do I recognise that place? And then he swiftly finds out why he recognises that place. It's the home of the writer that he attacked the first time around. So this guy is now in a wheelchair with his gay lover, I guess. Who I don't,
security guard.
I don't remember. I don't remember him. I think he was just a like casual security guard in the book, and then in the movie, it's just sort of. They're a bit close for an employee-employer relationship.
Yeah, and the attire is kind of casual. Side note, that guy is the guy who played Darth Vader.
Is it David Prowse?
Yeah!
So the writer takes him in, and the reason the writer takes him in is he goes, oh, you're that poor young chap I heard about on the news who was brutally assaulted by the prison system. And he doesn't recognise Alex because he was wearing a mask when he first went there. And so he kind of takes him in, but for ulterior motive. He's not just being a good Samaritan. In fact, as soon as he gets Alex let into the house, he's ringing people up being like, you'll never guess who I've found. You never guess who just knocked on my door. And so he does very much have this ulterior motive for taking Alex in, but nevertheless he does so, and he invites him to go for a bath. And then this is where there is another one of the differences.
Yes, so as a side effect of Alex singing in the rain, which was completely improvised on the film set, he now has to singing in the rain in order for the writer to recognise him. But I understand the book is different.
Yeah, in the book, basically, as part of a lot of all the conditioning and stuff, is that he was conditioned out of all of his droogisms and his nadsat. So, and again, this is really interesting because he's the narrator of the book, so you notice it in the way that the book is written. Suddenly his character has changed, and he's no longer using all of this like horror show nadsat, you know, all of that stuff. He's talking like a normal person. And this extends up to when he goes and knocks on the writer's door. It's like, please sir, you know, it's a brutal hard night outside, please could you let me in? But then what happens is he, without realising it, switches back to Nadsat, and that's when the author recognises him. He's like, oh, you're that young man who came in here and attacked me. Alex finishes his bath, at least in the movie, and he comes down, and the guy is like, wine? And Alex is like, oh, I'm alright. And he's like, no, have some wine. And then Alex is like, oh, I guess I better have some of this wine. And he's totally oblivious to the fact that he's been rumbled as well. And then, yeah, he gets sent up to the attic or whatever. Oh no, then he drinks the wine and it knocks him out, doesn't it?
Yeah, and he face plants into his, I think it's spaghetti.
Yeah, his food.
And I loved your acting there, that was worthy of Kubrick.
Yes. He wakes up and he's in like this attic room, isn't he?
Yes.
And we can hear something. I think we can hear it now if you listen.
There might be some music that is gorgeousness and gorgeosity combined, but for Alex it is now torture because it is exactly what he has been conditioned against. And in the film, he throws himself out of the window in an attempt to commit suicide because it's the only way out. Is that the same in the book?
I'm fairly sure it is the same in the book.
Okay.
But there is a key difference there.
Yes.
Because the actual ending of the movie and the books themselves basically totally changed the messages of both of them as works of art, I think.
Yes.
I don't think until this point, until the change with the ending, none of it was really significant enough where it changed almost the takeaway message. But I think this bit does.
So up until the final, should we say, chapter of the story, Stanley Kubrick has been damn near religious. I mean, there are stories where instead of turning up to set with a script, he turned up with the book. We are led to believe that Stanley had the American cut of the book because it ends with Alex being reconditioned back to his original self by the powers that be because it's now bad press because he has tried to kill himself. And the end of the story seems to glorify the natural violent instincts that are inherent in all humans. And I understand this is different in the book.
One thing I wanted to talk about as well, which is the introductory essay, and that's really quite relevant to this part, because basically this introductory essay was Anthony Burgess talking about, for one, he's very mystified why this is his best known book, because he's obviously a career author and has tons of other published books. I haven't read any of them, I must admit, although I would do. I've read Melvin Burgess, who wrote about heroin, but not anymore Anthony Burgess. But also he says in the American edition the last 2 chapters were cut from the publication, and he's very upset about this because he says, I deliberately started out with 3 acts of 6 chapters each, I think, and then in the American edition it was 6 chapters, 6 chapters, 4 chapters. Or I think, actually no, I think it was 8 chapters, 8 chapters, 6 chapters, because I think it was 24 chapters it was meant to have. And he was saying obviously that just totally affects the balance, it changes what the work, you know, is. But also the ending, at least in the book, which is very different to the movie. So as we say, in the movie he kind of gets reconditioned after this and goes back to his old self, which I don't know if I like, because I don't tend to like those stories where there's no character growth, and it's really irritating. It's like in Game of Thrones spoilers, when Jaime Lannister spent 6 seasons moving into a good guy and away from knobbing his sister, and then right at the end he goes back, and you're like, so that character arc where he went like that, he just went like that again right at the end, like what was the point of that? And that's kind of how I feel a little bit about Alex's character in A Clockwork Orange, because at the end he's just the same character, and it's like all the other characters as well, all the other characters have changed, like all of his droogs have grown up. If anything, he's now like at this weird mental thing where he's acting like somebody 3 years younger than he is or whatever, because he's been reconditioned to be a teenager even though he no longer is. And
no lesson is learned other than don't try and mess with it, we're all assholes underneath it, also why bother?
Yeah, and the system sucks, which does still kind of hold through to the book ending. But in the book ending I think is in many ways more sinister, because by the end of the book he's fully converted. So not only is he no longer going out and doing violent things, he doesn't even think about doing violent things and doesn't know that anything is different. He just thinks like, oh, this is how he's always been. So I guess he's fully reconditioned, and again, he doesn't necessarily know that he has been reconditioned.
That's unnerving.
Yeah, it's really unnerving. And then that asks the question then of like, okay, so is the end result worth the path they took to get there? Is the end result even ethical to begin with, which I would argue it's not, which I would argue is also kind of the point of it. But you know, if it is ethical, is it even worth the, you know, the result that they had to go through to get there? They put him through so much misery and all this stuff, and is it fair to do that, bearing in mind he was a criminal and he's now no longer a criminal, so technically society has benefited at great individual cost.
And also with the things that he had done in the first bit of the story, many people would say he deserves to die. So the fact that he is allowed to live, even though he's been punished and gone through all of this, he's now okay, but you kind of wish it hadn't gone that way. Yeah. So what side of the line are you on? This is so great for something that focuses on being orange so much. And
again, a big thing over like punishment versus rehabilitation. Everything that Alex goes through, is it punishment or is it rehabilitation, or is it both, or is it neither? Like
something else, it ties back to that question of choice, because he doesn't even realise that his free will is gone anymore. It feels like choices to him, and that's scary. You think you're making a choice, but you're not.
Well, I suppose he made that one choice not knowing all of the data, and then that drastically affected his life for the worst, a bit like the Brexit vote. Oh, I wanted to talk very briefly about the experience of listening to it as an audiobook, which was a lot of fun. So I've previously read it 15 years ago. I first read and watched it. Haven't really thought about it too much since. So it was interesting to listen to it via audiobook, especially because again it's this like first person narration in a lot of times. And I think maybe that helped with the comprehension in the same way you said in the film the acting helps you to understand what they're saying when they're talking about how a vesh is. You figure it out, you know, and because this guy was voice acting it, I think that helped with the understanding. Yeah, it was quite nice. It was like Alex was telling me the story of his life. There are a lot of the bits when Alex is doing the voiceover are like what the entirety of the book was like. It was as though the entirety of the book was told in that style through the voiceovers. I liked it. It was good.
I'm glad you liked it. Yeah. What is this about? If you like something, I'm likely to not like it. So I'm glad I watched the film.
But then again, as I say though, that's only the Nadsat and stuff is only really towards the start in that first section. Because as soon as you get to section 2 where they're in jail, they start breeding it out of him until at the end he's not using it. Has it been cancelled? Because it could well have been cancelled. This is one of those books that's a bit like 1984, where I see people saying like, you can't read it anymore because so-and-so. 1984 in particular is a bro-lit book, so it's considered, like if you're reading 1984, you're not very feminist.
I read 1984 and thought it was really effective.
It's very scarily relevant. Yeah, this is a problem which is happening with a lot of stuff, where it's kind of cutting off the debate a little bit.
Yeah.
And I think if it hasn't already happened to A Clockwork Orange, I think it would definitely start happening soon, because it is incredibly politically incorrect. I mean, I suppose that's a big part of the reason for it. But I think also because, you know, is it still relevant? Because new stories are being sort of told that are inspired by it and that take bits from it, and
they take the narrative forward. Yeah.
There's no shortage of you know, stories about, you know, the weird institutional stuff going on in jails as well. I mean, we're going to do one about asylums soon, for example, and that would be another interesting discussion we can have there.
Oh, yes. Well, that is definitely interesting. I mean, having not read the book, but based on your description of it, I think I am still likely to prefer the film just because I'm so visually inclined, and I love the nitty-gritty of the way Stanley Kubrick went about creating this piece of cinematography. I mean, his signature is all over this and I love it. There are also a couple of interesting things happening musically as well. You have this synthesized, almost industrial feel that's designed to give you this feeling that it's set in the future, which it is, and you've got this contrast with this classical Mozart, which is aspirational and elevates Alex above his fellow droogs and above his parents. And this is one of the examples, just like Beethoven, of diegetic music. That means music that is in the world that the actors are experiencing. When you hear the synthesized music, that is non-diegetic, so that is designed for you as an audience member, but the actors and the characters can't hear it. So now to introduce you to a song that Alex would have heard in the world.
This is I Want to Marry a Lighthouse Keeper. I want to marry a lighthouse keeper and keep him company. I want to marry a lighthouse keeper and live by the side of the sea. I'll polish his lamps by the light of day, so ships at night can find their way. I want to marry a lighthouse keeper, won't that be okay? We'll take walks along the moonlit bay, maybe find treasure too. Light love living in a lighthouse. Oh, whoa. I dream of living in a lighthouse, baby, every single day. I dream of living in a lighthouse, baby, the light one by the bay. So if you wanna make my dreams come true, then you'll be a lighthouse keeper too. We could live in a lighthouse, baby, won't that be okay? The white one by